Hello, Crafty Friends. This is Jen, and thank you for joining me today. My card for you today was created for the Karen Burniston November 2025 Designer Challenge. Our challenge this month was to create a card using the new Fun Faces stamp set. So I thought long and hard about this one. I was trying to think what characters I could use to use the Fun Faces on, or maybe a Christmas card, and then it hit me that I should make one final Halloween card before the season's over, and so I decided to use the Fun Faces in a glow-in-the-dark kind of way. So to start, I created an A2 size card from smooth black cardstock, and I had a paper pad of different wood grain paper from Michael's that I used as the floor. And this black and white striped paper I'm using as my wallpaper. So I'm going to take all the Fun Faces and I'm going to place them onto the striped pattern paper. And I picked faces, not the animal faces, but just the faces for like the mermaid or the paper people or the witch and the skeleton. And I'm just placing the Fireplace pop-up front die so that I can have a better idea of where to put the Fun Faces. Because for this card, I made a Fireplace pop-up. So I'm just kind of placing them around, seeing where they would fit better. The Fun Faces is a great stamp set. To add faces to all the different character and animal dies that Karen Burniston has created. And as always, all of the materials and supplies that I use to make this card will be listed in the description box below. So I'm removing the front of the Fireplace so I can add my magnet there. And I'm just trying to position these little faces where I want them. But this was my very first time using the stamp set and they were really sticky. So I had to get some reinforcement to get them off my finger. And then once I have all my faces in place where I want them, I'm going to use Versamark ink and Lawn Fawn glow-in-the-dark embossing powder. But first I'm going to add my static powder, this great little brush and bottom combo thing from Simon Says Stamps. It works amazing. And I'm going to make sure that I stamp twice with the Versamark ink so that I get it really saturated. And then I can go in with my glow-in-the-dark embossing powder. Now this is a bit of a thicker embossing powder. It's not like the ultra thin or super thin embossing powders that you can get. That's why I doubled up on the Versamark ink just to make sure. And then I'm just going to heat set that and try not to make a mess on my desk. And I'll just set that aside, my Misty aside, and then I've heat set the faces and I'm just going to wipe off the excess powder with my cloth. And now I'm going to use some double-sided adhesive tape to add this to the inside of my card. And I'm just going to place that on, and then like I usually do, I'm going to also do the floor while I'm at it. And I did add some black soot distress ink around the edges of that floor. But what I did was I didn't dab my brush into the actual distress ink, I just used what was left on the brush so that it wasn't like overly black around the edges. I just wanted to kind of give it that rough look. It's kind of a haunted house, so you just want it to look a little bit, you know, old. So I'm just going to add these in. And then I'm going to test to make sure that I didn't go over my fold line. And make sure it folds all good. And now we can get started on the fireplace. So the first thing to add is the bottom part that goes on the floor. And then this little square that goes in the back, and that's what goes into the back of the fireplace. The rectangle that I'm gluing now is actually the top of the fireplace. And then you can use it as the base of the fireplace as well as the mantle. And I'm just placing this back so you don't see the striped paper in the back of my fireplace. I die cut the fireplace from a light gray cardstock, and I'm just going to fold on the score lines. And it's going to kind of create a box. And then you have these two little arms, and they go down the sides of the front of the fireplace. Karen Burniston has a really great assembly video for this, where she goes step by step on how to assemble this pop-up. So I'm just going to glue the tab to the back. And those two little holes would be used to add the Santa boots that come with the die set. So it looks like Santa's coming down the chimney. But not today, because it's Halloween. So for this one, I decided to go in with black soot. I'm not doing anything fancy. I'm going in as rough as I can because, like I said, it's a haunted house. We want it to look kind of dilapidated, a little on the rough side. And then I'm going to use the excess to go all around the, I guess the center around where the fire is. So it gives it that used look. And I'm just going to clean off my dye, and you just spray a little water, wipe it off with your cloth, and you're good to go. Except for all the black ink on my hands. So I'm going to add glue to each of the little arms and to the big rectangle box. And then that corner you meet up with the pop-up mechanism corner, and you add up to, oh my goodness, add up. You put the corners to the corners on the arms. Now the box, it's not flush with the front of the fireplace. It gives it a little bit of an edge to it. And then I'm just going to glue those tabs down onto the base of my fireplace. I apologize. I am not finding words today. Now, all that's left to do is to glue this piece down, and I'm just going to fold my card down and add a weight to it to keep it in place. And then I'm going to let that glue sit. And then I'm just going to test out the mechanism, make sure that it works good, and it does. So now I can move on to creating my mantle. I die cut this from smooth white cardstock. I'm folding along the score line and then going over it with my bone folder to give it a good crisp fold. And now I'm going to color this in with Copic markers. So I'm starting with E49, which is dark bark. And all I'm doing is creating wood lines. And you can make this however you want. This die does have an embossing feature. It does have wood grain on it, but I just created my own. So if you wanted to die cut it from brown cardstock and then run it through with your embossing pad, then you could do that and it would show up really nicely. Now I'm going in with E59, which is walnut, and I'm just kind of adding some shadow, and we're just going to add some depth to this mantle. I'm going to use E37 and then blend those two colors together. And as you can see, that dark bark wood grain that I created does stand out pretty good. Now I'm going to use E35 and then blend that all together. I did decide that the E35 was a little too light, and I went in with hazelnut to kind of blend that in together, which is E23. But like I said, I wanted this to look rough. So I'm going to add glue to the top of the fireplace pop-up mechanism, and I'm going to add glue to the shorter section of the mantle. And then I'm going to glue that onto my fireplace. And I do make sure that I center it. And I'm just using my hands to hold it in place while the glue sets. Then I'm going to give it a fold, make sure that it looks okay. And we're all good to go. So my next step here is to create some decorations for my fireplace. So I decided to create a garland and a wreath, and I'm going to use the bows and the garland and wreath that comes with one of the fireplace add-on sets. And I also die cut a strip of skulls using the Halloween borders. So I'm going in with G99, and I'm just kind of roughly creating a like a shadow area around this garland, because I kind of wanted it to look drab. So I went with the more olive colors. So I'm using YG67 for this next section, and I'm going to blend those two together. And then lastly, I'm going in with YG63. And I apologize that I didn't put my lid down. I get in a habit of holding the lid while I color, and I sometimes forget when I'm filming to put the lid down, so I apologize. So I also went with my brush and just kind of darkened the bottom of the garland, just to give it a little bit of dimension. And now I'm going to color in my little bows, but I'm going to make them orange. So I'm starting with YR09. And I'm just going to add that to all four of the little bows. Then I'm going to go in with YR07. And then blend those two together. And then we're going to use YR04. Now I did go back in with a darker color to do the shadow area. I found that it kind of washed it out, so I wanted to make it kind of pop a little more. So I'm just going to glue these on first. And I do apologize. I didn't realize that my battery died on my camera. And so you don't see me finishing this part or gluing it to the card. And I apologize for that. I did add some skulls. So I went in with the E19, darkened up those bows. And then I did add some of the skulls in between my bows, and then I glued it to the mantle of my fireplace. And like I said, I apologize for that. So now I'm going to create my fire. which I die cut it from smooth white cardstock, and I'm going to add it to my fireplace, but I'm going to add this little tab that comes with the set, which I die cut from smooth black cardstock. And that just kind of makes the fire stand out a little bit more from the wall so it doesn't look flat. I'm using YR09 to color in the bottom of the fire. Then I thought it needed some red. I did go in with prawn, but it wasn't dark enough. I didn't like it. So I did go in with lipstick red, which is R29, and I added that to the bottom. And then I went back in with my YR09 and I just blended those two together. Now I'm going to use YR07 and then blend that. And really all this coloring is just layering color on top of color. So YR04 is going to be my lightest orange. And then I'm going to go in with Y17, which is kind of a golden yellow color. I believe it is called golden yellow. And that just finished off my fire. So now I'm going to glue my little tab in. And what you do is you glue the base to the floor of the fireplace. And you want to center that into the little fireplace hole. I apologize for my head. And then you fold it in half and you add glue to the furthest tab from you. And then I just folded my card down and it glues it to the back of the wall of the fireplace. And now you have a little tab that you can stick the fire to. And I do have a little glue there, but it does dry clear, so it's not a big deal. So I'm gluing my fire on. And not thinking about the wood that goes in the fireplace, I put my grill on first and then had to go back in and put the wood on. And I'm going to turn my card around so I can see what I'm doing here. And I just added glue to each end. And now I'm gluing it to my fireplace front. Now the fireplace and the add-ons, there's two different grills that you can use. And there's all kinds of neat add-ons, plants, picture frames, garlands, wreaths, bows, this little set where it has the fire shovel and poker. So it's definitely, if you haven't already gotten this set, I highly recommend it. Now this is where I realized I forgot to put the wood on the fire. So I went in with E59. And then I'm going to use E37 and just blend those together. And then E35 to finish it off. And then with my tweezers, I'm just going to add that to the base of my fire. And we're all set there. So I decided that it would be kind of cool to have a little basket, but not of logs for the fire. So I'm coloring this in with grays. So I used the N series of grays for Copic. So N7, N6, N5, 4, and 3. And in my basket, instead of wood, I decided to add skulls. So we're going to have a basket of skulls. So for the skulls, what I do is I cut out the border. I add the eyes and little nose using the die as a stencil. And then I just trim off each skull, trimming off all the little bits that are left. And I just trimmed off all the little skulls, and then that's how I separate them and use them individually instead of in a border. And you can just do this with your craft scissors. And I'm just trimming off these little pieces here. And the last one, Okay, and now I can start gluing them into my basket. For my glue, I'm using Lanco Neutral pH adhesive in a fine tip bottle, and you can get that through Karen Burniston's website. And like I said before, it will be listed with all the products that I've used today to make this card. And I'm just adding all the little skulls wherever I feel that one needed a little glue on the front instead of the back. And you don't have to, you could use pumpkins. You could use the pumpkin border from the Halloween borders to add pumpkins to the little basket. That would be kind of neat. Or the bones. There's the bones too. You could add skull and bones. So there's all kinds of neat things that you could add to a card like this. And I'm going to add another little skull over on the other side. Like it was one that rolled over. So I wasn't sure whether I was going to use the wreath or not, but then I decided that I would. I didn't want it to cover over too much of my glow-in-the-dark faces. So I'm using the same color combination as the garland, which is G99. YG67. And YG63. Now for this, I added some more skulls to my wreath. And I also used some liquid pearls that I had in like bright orange and yellow. And I just added some little dots to make it look like like I guess like holly berries, but not holly berries because it's Halloween. And I'm setting that aside to dry. It took about an hour for it to dry properly so that when you close the card, it didn't smush it. Now I'm going to add like a little rug to the base, and that's also where I'm going to have my sentiment. And I also used the new Halloween sentiment stamp that Karen came out with, and I'm adding the Happy Haunting stamp to the floor. So I'm using Versamark black ink for that, and I'm just going to glue the sentiment onto a white or an orange background to add that little pop of color to the card. And then I'll glue that to the floor of my card. Okay, so my wreath is dry now. So I'm going to add that as my finishing touch. I didn't know whether I'd put it on the mantle or I would put it on the wall, but I liked it on the wall. And it's going to cover up a little bit of the face, but it's going to peek through, so that's kind of neat. So for the front of the card, I decided that I just wanted to keep it simple because I was going to have more glow-in-the-dark faces on the front. So I cut a piece of the black and white striped pattern paper, and then I placed it in my MISTI, and I'm going to add my oval where I'm going to have my sentiment, just so I have an idea of where to put my faces. And then I'm just going to add all my little faces. Okay, so I'm going to make sure that I have that oval centered. And now I can add all my little faces. And again, I didn't use the animal faces like the bear or anything like that. I did use, I think, the frog, the skeleton, the witch, and all the paper people faces, different things like that. And I'm just adding those all the way around my oval. And just like the background of my card on the inside, I'm going to use the Versamark ink and the glow-in-the-dark embossing powder. And I will use that twice so I can remove my oval if it doesn't get stuck to my magnet. Use my static powder. And then I'm going to make sure that I stamp this twice so that it gets good and saturated. And like I said, I did keep the front of the card pretty basic. I didn't want to go too crazy with decoration because when it glows in the dark, that's kind of the neat part of the whole card. So I didn't want to take away from that. And the glow-in-the-dark embossing powder, this stuff has lasted me forever. So it's definitely worth it. And I'll just dump the excess back into my bottle, and then I'm going to heat set that. The only thing I have to say is that it's kind of hard to tell if you've got it all heat set. That's probably my only complaint about the glow-in-the-dark embossing powder, because it does kind of go clear, but sometimes it's kind of hard to tell if you missed a spot or not. So I made sure I heat like the back and the front so that I could make sure that I got everything. And then I'll just take my cloth and I'll go over the excess embossing powder and just make sure that I've removed that after I've heat set it. So I'm just going to use my cloth to remove that excess powder. And I didn't wet my cloth because it is pretty thin pattern paper. I die cut 2 more ovals, one from smooth white cardstock, one from orange cardstock. And now this time I'm going to use the Be Afraid, Be Very Afraid. And I added also a little boo and an RIP, which was these littler tiny stamps that come with the sentiment stamp set. And I thought that would be kind of neat to add to the front. So for this I'm using the detail black ink from Pinkfresh Studios, and I'm just going to stamp that twice. And then I'll glue the 2 ovals together. And then I'll add that to the front of my card. I like that pop of orange. I think it kind of makes the card, gives it that little bit extra. Kind of reminds me of the Addams Family. And now I'm just going to use glue to glue this onto the front instead of the double-sided adhesive tape. Make sure that that's positioned properly and then give that a push down. And there's our finished card. So here's the inside of my haunted house card, and then there's the glow-in-the-dark faces. Isn't that neat? And then there's the front, and then the glow-in-the-dark faces. Thank you for joining me today. Have a great day.